Alright folks, video 3 of 3 for the day. I saved the juicy one for the nighttime upload. Actually, this is kind of a continuation of my video from yesterday. And honestly, it's kind of a response of some of the comments that I've seen anytime anybody discusses third-party games not running well on the Switch 2, which at this point is almost like hourly. I think most recently I saw somebody post about Borderlands 4 really just being terrible on the Switch 2. I don't know, every few hours I'll see something pop up where there's just another game that somebody's complaining about the way it runs on the Switch 2. And there are generally a few different replies that we are all seeing repeatedly every time one of these things get posted. One of them is that the console is new, you gotta give it time for developers to get used to it so they can release good games on there. And obviously part of that issue is because Nintendo did not provide dev kits to a lot of developers, but there are developers that had dev kits that are still putting out bad ports, so I don't know how much that actually matters. But the thing is, the whole giving the Switch 2 time and the dev kit situation, like that's a different discussion. I think a whole other topic you can cover separately. And I think many other people have covered that topic extensively. The response that gets me to scratch my head is when people see that something is not supported on the Switch 2. And when I say people, I obviously mean those that don't want any criticism or anything negative surrounding the Switch 2 and its media. Whenever something is objectively bad about the Nintendo Switch 2, their fallback answer is to usually suggest that you need to blame the devs for this. Like, it's the third-party devs' fault, it's not Nintendo's fault, we need to go and blame them. And look, I don't necessarily disagree with this sentiment. I might disagree with some examples, like they'll point to Cyberpunk. That's kind of their fallback, is like, well, Cyberpunk can do it. And it's like, okay, great, you're talking about one game. Sure. And even with that one game, as I covered yesterday, Digital Foundry put it in a test against like the PS4 Pro and the Series S, and it underperformed comparatively to those, but fine. But I think despite that, this whole idea of like blaming the third-party devs doesn't really accomplish anything. Like, the people that are saying this are looking at it from the angle of a Nintendo fan. They're looking at it as somebody that loves Nintendo and loves the Switch 2, and the Switch 2 can do no wrong, and they want to buy every single Nintendo first-party title, and then a few different, like, 2D third-party indie games. And in their mind, it's like, you know what, if EA doesn't want to make Madden run good, then we should all punish EA and not buy it. Or like, if Microsoft isn't putting Call of Duty on the Switch 2, then screw them, I'm not giving them my money. Like, yeah, okay, go ahead. Now all of a sudden they have spines and they're boycotting. Fine. The problem is they're not really thinking about it from the angle of somebody that wants to play these games. Like, you gotta realize there is an audience for these titles specifically, and it's the reason why Nintendo is so obsessed about bringing them over to the Switch 2. And there's a reason why they're pushing so hard for the advertisement for how powerful the Switch 2 is to allegedly be able to run these games. And it's because these games are very popular. Like, think about it. You have Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, a game that was released in 2017 and came out to almost 70 million units now. Animal Crossing, 48 million as of June 30th, 2025. We view these as massive successes for Nintendo. I believe they are the best-selling games of all time, at least they were for the Switch 1. Numbers that high are extremely rare. Like, there are only 2 games on the whole entirety of the Switch 1 that hit over 40 million. And then, like, depending at what source you look at, Call of Duty's hitting that 40 million. EAFC 25 hit like 20 million copies on PlayStation alone. And I mean, look, you can dig around for the sources of these numbers. They might be off depending on where you're looking. But the point is that the amount of money these games regularly bring in, and specifically the player base that they attract, is massive by every stretch of the imagination. Like, I'm not gonna sit there and try to act like they are more important than Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was for the Switch 1. But the user base that they could bring in for a Nintendo ecosystem is huge, and Nintendo realizes that. And that's just looking at EAFC, Madden, Call of Duty. And in addition to all of that, you have all of the different third-party titles that are major AAA releases that are coming out every single year. And specifically in these first couple of months where heads would potentially turn for the Nintendo Switch 2, and people have either opted to buy it or they're thinking about buying it, when they hear that it's not going to be running well on the Switch 2, it doesn't matter to them that the developers are not optimizing it for the Switch 2. As far as they're concerned, they're like, oh, okay, well then I'm just gonna go buy a console that EA respects. Like, they've been buying and playing these games on the highest end hardware every single year. All of a sudden, they're gonna be like, oh, my bad. I guess we're playing at 30 frames per second now. No, that's not how it works. And I'm actually gonna use a non-gaming example to kind of express my point. I think I mentioned a few times previously, but back when Microsoft bought out Nokia and they were releasing the Nokia Lumia lineup, I ended up buying a Windows phone. Now, the actual OS for the Windows phone was really cool. It had the live tiles on it, the cameras were super nice, and for a very brief moment in time, Microsoft was only allowing its Office apps to run on Windows Phone. And everybody that picked one up was an enthusiast, right? Because nobody goes and buys a Windows Phone when there's Apple and Samsung and Blackberries all around. So what happened is a lot of us bought into these Windows phones and we're like, oh, this is very cool, it's very niche. And we're like, oh, Microsoft is massive. All of the popular apps will certainly be on this device. And so what more and more people started to figure out was they would buy this Windows phone, and let's say they wanted Snapchat, for example. There was no native Snapchat app on the device. And there were more that were like really basic that didn't show up. Like I know Google Maps wasn't there. And I think even Instagram might have not been there. It was a long time ago. I don't remember, but there was like all the popular apps were not yet on the device. And so what would happen is you would see all these hardcore Microsoft fanboys going online. And they would be like, you know, Snapchat is like the scum of the earth and it's bad for our society anyway. We shouldn't even want this on there. And we should blame Snapchat for not putting their app on this device. If they actually respected the user, they would have made it good and we would have all downloaded it and used it. And it was like a weird cultish bubble of all of these Windows Phone users who were just kind of like, yeah, like we're gonna go against Snapchat. Now, I didn't really buy into this hype, obviously. There were third-party apps that got the job done. I was fine with using those ones for the time being. And I was like, oh, like I believed in the hype. I was like, eventually they're gonna come to this phone. Like, why would they miss out on all these people that are buying these Windows phones? But then more and more as time went on, anytime people would see my phone, they'd be very intrigued and they'd be like, well, yeah, I've been like fed up with Apple or fed up with Samsung and this might be a good idea. Maybe I'll jump into your phone because like there was a bright color and it had a nice camera. And then they would look up the apps that were available. And again, I'm just using Snapchat as the example here. There were more apps than Snapchat missing, but they'd be like, oh, like Snapchat is not available on this thing? Forget it. I don't want it. And they wouldn't buy the phone. I'd be like, well, you know, eventually Snapchat will be on this thing. It's a Microsoft device. There's no way in hell they're not going to sit there and just support the phone. But that person would be like, yeah, well, how about when they support it? Then I'll jump in. I'll buy it at that point. This is kind of the same idea here. Now, don't get me wrong, this doesn't imply that the Switch 2 will be discontinued the way Windows phones were. Far from it. But the idea is that if you're trying to attract somebody into a new ecosystem, blaming developers gets you nowhere. If anything, it's on Nintendo to figure out how to make their device more appealing for these developers to want to make good games on there. And just like all those Windows Phone people were crazy because they thought that an entire generation of young millennials were going to be like, no, I don't want Snapchat anymore. There are just a whole crap ton of Nintendo people that just look insane because they think that by saying it's the third-party developer's fault, all of a sudden people are gonna be like, oh, okay, fine, I'll just stop playing Madden and Call of Duty, or insert whatever third-party title is running poorly on the Switch 2. Now, you can argue that the Switch 2 doesn't need those games and doesn't need the people that play those games, and I would fully agree because the Switch 1, while not being a third-party high-end AAA device, and a vast majority of people buy the Switch 2 strictly for the first-party titles, with a few indie games sprinkled in between, and I would say, yeah, I fully agree. The Switch 2 is a first-party console, first and foremost. Actually, first, second, third, fourth, all the way up until 23rd best-selling game and foremost. And that's fine. Nintendo found success with that for the Switch 1, and they could potentially find success with that in the Switch 2 as well. But like this idea of immediately just being like, well, blame the third-party devs that the games are not running well on there. That's a very dumb rebuttal. It's a dumb comment. It would be like me looking at the people that didn't want to buy the Windows Phone and say, we can blame Snapchat. It's not Microsoft's phone, so just buy the phone and be happy. No, I told them foolishly that if you buy the phone, eventually Snapchat will come on board instead. And of course I was wrong about that. So likewise, if you use that response for the people that want to switch to, you're probably gonna be wrong about that too. But at least that way, you won't be putting people down for liking third-party games. Like man, in my own comment sections, there's people that are just aggressively going after anybody that wants to play a third-party title. Like people mentioning like, oh, I was gonna buy this thing, but since this game's not running properly or that game is not gonna be coming to it early enough, I'd like to jump ship. And then like they straight up get insulted for wanting to play these third-party titles. I don't know, apparently these hardcore Switch 2 apologists have reached the same level of arrogance and narcissism that Nintendo has, and they think they can just treat people like crap because that's what Nintendo does, even though Nintendo made money off of you and you got ripped off, so like, why would you feel like that's a good choice? It's not a good look. And trust me, as somebody that is a major hardcore Nintendo fan that has spent the past 4 months having not a good look plastered across my channel because I decided I wanted to speak my mind instead of just bowing down to bullcrap, I know a thing or two about the impacts of what something could appear to those that disagree with you. And insulting people for liking different types of third-party titles or belittling their gaming experience because it doesn't align with yours, that's not the move. But again, even in the scenario where these people are actually being nice, because sometimes like they're not being jerks about it. They're just saying, well, you know, it's a third-party devs' problem. I'm just here to say that it doesn't matter whose fault it is, whether it's the third-party devs' fault or whether it's Nintendo's fault. That doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, the customer wants what they want to buy, and 6 million plus people already know that. And likewise, the other 140 million plus people that don't want to buy a Switch 2 after getting a Switch 1 know that as well. Although, come to think of it, at least 1/3 of Switch 1 buyers realistically bought either the V2 or the OLED or the Lite or just one of the limited edition ones. You know, the Switch 1 was so affordable that I'm guessing at least 1/3 of those sales were double and triple dips. So maybe 140 is overselling it, and it's closer to like 100 million people decided that they don't want to buy a Switch 2 after having a Switch 1. Either way, that's a separate tangent. So anyway, the point is you can blame whoever you want. At the end of the day, it's very clear that the Switch 2 is not going to be good for third-party games. And day by day, we're just finding more and more third parties that are completely botching it for this console. So naturally, anybody that is more attached to these third-party titles than the first-party Switch titles is either going to end up not buying anything for their Switch 2, or they're going to sell their Switch 2, or they're just very likely not going to buy the Switch 2 at all. And that is obviously very important for Nintendo because, again, they're really pushing this idea of having a powerful console in order to getting those numbers. And we'll have to see how that looks long term. We obviously already know how I feel that's going to look long term, but yeah, that's just an assumption. Anyway, that's all I got for tonight. I hope you all have a good weekend. I'm sure I'll be back tomorrow or the day after with something else to talk about. Thank you all so much for listening, and I will catch you on the next one.